Monsters? They looked like monsters to you? Oh,
Silent Hill 3 might be one of the greatest examples of buddy horror in the history of video games. Because while the art of degenerating and perverting organic anatomy is a widely used trope to evoke feelings of disgust and unease in the audience, the Silent Hill series has a reputation for making the abject talk. Masahiro Ito's designs bestow the abominations of Silent Hill with layers upon layers of narrative depth that's tied to the psychological landscape of the visitors trapped in this nightmarish purgatory. As the town shifts and shapes according to its spiritual host, Silent Hill 3 is a nightmare shaped by the subconscious of Alessa, a girl chastised by a religiously fanatic mother who was coerced into becoming the godmother of the Order. But at the end of the first game, her soul is reincarnated into an infant who grows up under the care of Harry Mason. Cheryl, better known under her alias Heather, is grown up now, a young woman, but her origin inexorably pulls her back into the wake of the Order. Heather's life has been a journey of social isolation and teenage insecurity. Constantly hiding from the grasp of the cult, she grew up adopting a fake name, never given the opportunity to strike roots in a place, never able to establish her own identity in the adolescent phase of life that's all about finding out who you really are. Always forced to look over her shoulder without the support of family members or a circle of friends like in a normal childhood, those circumstances nourished the identity crisis that grew from her repressed memories of an abusive childhood as Dahlia Gillespie's daughter. A child that grows up under such arduous circumstances stands a high risk of developing forms of post-traumatic stress disorder, a common catalyst for other dissociative conditions in later stages of life, such as borderline personality disorder, which often results in pathological trust issues, unpredictable social behavior, and difficulties in establishing both platonic and romantic relationships. Maybe more than in any other game in the series, Masahiro Ito's Francis Bacon-inspired monsters convey this feeling of helplessness, confined to a metaphorical cocoon for an agonizing metamorphosis. Many creatures twitch and jerk violently, as if they've been fettered into a straitjacket of their own identity and ache to break free from their constraints. The game's monster design is tailored around systemic societal female and to a lesser extent teenage anxieties. Insecurity about appearance, identity, and uneasy sexuality, the fear of being watched and stalked, of being objectified, or becoming victim of sexual assault and rape. In addition to that, the third pillar of Heather's bane is her imposed role as the Order's Mother of God, implying the notion of unwanted pregnancy and the disturbing process of giving birth to a parasite that results from it. We can find all of these themes sewn into the fabric of the game's visual language, but perhaps the one that encompasses Alessa and Heather's burden better than any other is the Closer. A grotesquely shaped behemoth that drags massive extremities behind it that appear more like enormous cancerous protrusions than actual arms. It towers over Heather and obstructs her path with its gigantic proportions, a very characteristic that coined its name. With its long reach, it deals clumsy but brutal blows, and its mass turns it into an outright bullet sponge, which makes any attempt to fight it mostly ill-advised. Heather's best strategy against the Closer is to just outmaneuver it. You could say that Heather is the running back and the Closer is the linebacker, and when it gets you...
Whoa! You killed it, Joe! You make some more! You know that, baby!
Anyway, one of the keys to understanding the Closer's place in Heather's story we can find hidden in Alessa's room. Now, when I played Silent Hill 1 for the first time and entered Alessa's room right before the finale, it was one of the strongest eureka moments I've ever had in any video game so far. Almost stereotypically, this small nursery consisted of a children's bed, a wooden desk, a wardrobe, and, pinned to the walls and scattered across the floor, children's drawings. Upon closer inspection, those crude crayon paintings were like blueprints for the monsters Harry had been encountering throughout the game. The pterodactyl-like air screamers, the disfigured dog-like groaners, the insect collection on the wall that haunted us in the form of night flutters and float stingers. That was the moment when I realized that all of the monsters and apparitions were spawned from the mind maze of Alessa Gillespie. And there's one more image, almost hidden in the corner, that already foreshadows the closer. It depicts a huge creature towering over an infant. Alessa's perspective of how she perceived herself overwhelmed by the abusive treatment by her mother. However, Alessa is grown up now. This drawing, though, is still in the same place, but it looks slightly altered by now. The creature's arms have grown longer and it has taken a more triangular shape. And the little girl it looms over is no longer painted in purple, the color associated with Alessa, but in Heather's signature orange. This memento has grown into an amalgamation of Alessa's fears and Heather's societal anxieties as a post-adolescent young woman. When we first encounter the closer in the mall, the scene almost exactly mirrors the angle of the drawing. The nightmare has become self-aware. The closer's huge proportions are almost a direct analogy to the way Alessa experienced the treatment of her mother, the catalyst for an evolving fear and distrust of adults in general. Through the eyes of a small child, every grown-up seems like a giant. This is truly the nastiest part about Alessa's experience, the unmitigated physical inferiority to her mother, who not only mentally impaired her by denying her the trust and care of a loving mother figure, but who also repeatedly physically mistreated Alessa. This is also the origin of the closer's humongous and grossly shaped arms. There is a common rule in the field of dog training saying that when you punish a dog, you should never, under no circumstances, strike it with your own hand or it will become hand-shy. I mean, you shouldn't hit an animal no matter what, if you ask me, but for the sake of argument. This is no different with children. The physical superiority of a parent over a child turns even a mild slap into a massive blow from the perspective of such a small being. It's because the physical force gets multiplied with the humiliation of being hurt by a person of trust that it brings. And this is how it feels to receive a stunning blow from the closer when it sluggishly swings its cancerous, steel-reinforced club arms around. It's a direct allegory to Alessa's life at the mercy of Dahlia Gillespie. But scattered across its disproportionate body, we can also find allusions to Heather's experiences as a teenager and young woman. For example, Alessa's deeply rooted distrust of adults, which gradually evolved into a persecution complex during Heather's adolescent years. In stark contrast to its bulky and muscular physique, the closer is an outright mockery of the female form. It is dressed in ridiculously lascivious clothes, high heels, and a short skirt dress, not unlike the one Heather herself is wearing. On a side note, skirts and insinuations of male gaze can be found repeatedly throughout the game. Ladders or escalators that put Heather in an inconvenient angle to the players, or even Valtiel's gaze in the background. Nurses placed in a way that makes it almost unavoidable for them to fall in the direction that aligns them perfectly to the camera, or even the closer itself in the shopping mall cutscene after being shot, which only adds to this theme of feeling stalked and observed like we mentioned earlier. The closer's face, if you can call it that, consists of a giant pair of lips, salaciously smacking, slurping, and moaning. This part of this monster might be the most striking example for the objectification of the feminine into soulless lust objects. It's constrained to a perfectly round shape. Not an organic round, but it's fixated into a tight metal ring that gives it the distinct appearance of a male sex toy. All of this conveys the subconscious fear of predatory male behavior and sexual objectification that Heather's distrust of adults grew into during Heather's adolescent phase, dominated by secrecy, mistrust, and vigilance. This is also apparent by the way the closer mutilates its victims. After subduing them to the ground, it violently tears and chews their faces apart, eating away skin, flesh, and facial features in a frenzy of carnal rage, accompanied by almost confused outcries and lustful moans and slurps. This kind of sexually charged cannibalistic outburst reappears in a more poetic form later in the Brookhaven Hospital. Scattered throughout this location, Heather finds extremely obsessive notes by the confined patient Stanley Coleman, who suffers from severe attachment disorder. In his notes, he vividly paints his ever-growing manic obsession for Heather, and in one very long poem, he describes in morbid detail how he dreams of subduing, desecrating, and devouring the face of a nurse that he had sexually abused several times before. Considering that the model of the Closer's victim during the shopping mall cutscene is actually a bloodied version of Angela Orozco from Silent Hill 2, who herself was a victim of abuse and rape by her father during her childhood, I mean, of course this might just be coincidental, a convenient choice of a 3D model that was just lying around, but considering the attention to detail that Masahiro Ito and Team Silent is known for putting into their work, it fits the whole theme uncannily well. The Closer's head itself is a spineless appendix that jabbers around aimlessly. It reminds me of a description from Stanislav Lem's Solaris, where a creature that's taken the shape of a human infant is described to move within the natural constraints of a human body, but without any understanding of sense and purpose. This uncanny and arbitrary movement pattern makes it look like it's randomly exploring all the possible angles and shapes this unfamiliar husk offered its host. And this style of random jerks and spasms describes the way the Closer operates its worm-like head protrusion and to a lesser extent the rest of its body almost spot on. As I've already mentioned earlier, many creatures in this game share this movement pattern. Violent and uncontrolled twitches and seemingly random contractions that give the impression of a soul that's trapped within a prison of flesh, vehemently struggling against the constraints of their organic prison. Like a chrysalis trying to break out of its cocoon. This analogy isn't arbitrary. Butterflies and nymphas are a symbol that's closely associated with Alessa and respectively Heather, the insect collection full of butterflies in the nursery at the end of both games, and a plethora of enemies that are directly based on insects in a pupa stage. And that is, throughout many cultures, a classic symbol for rebirth, metempsychosis, or reincarnation. The Silent Hill series, and especially the Order's doctrines, are closely tied to the notion of rebirth through metamorphosis. The scriptures tell allegories of an ongoing cycle of attempts to bring God into this world through an incarnation of the prodigal birth mother Saint Alessa. And hey, there are even real-world religions based on that principle. Hinduism, Jainism, Taoism, Celtic and Norse mythology, and of course Buddhism all incorporate forms of the concept of reincarnation. If only we could tie that more closely to the Closer. But what's that? There seems to be an edgy string of Japanese symbols tattooed on the top of its worm-like head. And it's apparently so important to the very designer of the monster, Masahiro Ito, that he tweeted out this clue a couple of years ago, conveniently delivering the translation with his revelation. It spells, like Lotus Sutra. Now, the Lotus Sutra is one of the most popular and influential scriptures that forms the basis of several schools of Buddhism, such as Tendai, Qiantao, Nichiren, and especially Qiantai, the most prevalent denomination of the Buddhist Dharma in Japan. Its core philosophy, the Chatvari Arya Satyani, the Four Noble Truths, describe the journey of each individual soul, human, animals, and plants alike, according to the principles of samsara, dukkha, karma, and nirvana. Samsara, which literally translated means wandering, refers to the theory of rebirth and the cyclicality of all life, matter, and existence. It implies that every soul lives through an ongoing cycle of life and reincarnation, but it is not considered desirable to be reborn, since the journey of an imperfect life is part of the dukkha. Loosely translated, it means unsatisfying or suffering, suggesting that life itself is an undesired intermediate state in which our own shortcomings and desires prevent us from breaking the cycle of eternal suffering. To achieve this state of inner perfection, one has to acquire karma, literally translated meaning something like action or work. And that is achieved through shaping our own desires to meet the world around us. It's a notion that stands in stark contrast to the traditional Western Enlightenment-fueled ideology that we can and should change the world to meet our needs and desires. Karma is a uniquely East Asian philosophy that's usually not that easily approachable for Western audiences. The idea of freeing ourselves of the mundane dead weight that prevents us from reaching the perfect, shapeless inner state of enlightenment required to achieve fulfillment in nirvana. And the notion of nirvana is not, as often assumed, a form of afterlife in which we can indulge in all our gluttonous pleasures until the end of time. It is nothingness, the liberation from the never-ending cycle of mortal torment, literally meaning blowing out, becoming extinguished. And that is, and has always been, the core philosophy behind Silent Hill. Not only for Alessa/Cheryl/Heather, who is literally reborn over and over and over again, each time carrying the burden of her former self with her, but the cycle of torment is also heavily implied for the other characters of the series. Many parts of Silent Hill 2, for example, strongly hint at the notion that James is trapped in a flat circle, doomed to repeat his path of redemption over and over and over until he finds the inner strength to free himself of what anchors him to this world. Silent Hill 4 revisits that concept in a truly agonizing manner for the player themselves, making them revisit all of the game's locations a second time in an even more excruciating incarnation. But nowhere is this idea more prevalent than in Heather's story. The terrible experiences her soul has accumulated over several lifetimes of trauma, isolation, and angst, those are the things that mold her monsters into shape. And the souls trapped in them, twitching, jerking, trying to break free, it's all Heather herself, subconsciously fighting against her dukkha. She even literally confronts her own tormented past, the memory of Alessa. It's an almost blatantly symbolic showdown against the demonic personification of her dark past.
If you're frightened of dying and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels, freeing you from the earth. It's just a matter of how you look at it, that's all.
Just as Louis in Jacob's Ladder, one of the biggest influences on the Silent Hill series suggests how hell or purgatory or just Silent Hill, it's not a place that mindlessly tortures and torments its visitors for arbitrary sadistic reasons. It's a place of catharsis where our desires and struggles, our traits and flaws get burned away, and where we learn that they are truly the things that hold us down and prevent us from finding inner peace, from finding redemption. only if we shape our desires to the world by letting loose of all the mortal dead weight dragging us down, by suffocating those deceiving hopes and fears we so desperately cling to. Only then can we achieve the pure state of harmony to finally break the circle of eternal recurrence. Like Lotus Sutra, Heather's journey, her samsara, is a path of suffering, of dukkha. Only through her actions, her karma, she can free herself to be finally liberated from the endless circle. The closer is the sentinel who guards the path. Like Cerberus at the gates of Hades, its only purpose is to impede Heather's progress towards her destination, armed with the combined anguish of several lifetimes of hardship, trauma, and abuse. The closer is Heather's weaker side come to life, the nagging voice in her mind that urges her to capitulate, to quit fighting, and simply give up. Don't we all have such a thing inside of us?
Happy birthday to you. Happy 31st birthday, my dear.
Who are you?
Oh, I'm the one who has your present. Yes, in fact, a lot of people have collected for your gift. See those names scrolling along? All of these gracious people have given their hard-earned money to make you happy, my dear. In fact, some of them bestowed quite staggering sums, if I might say so. Sweethearts like Caroline Mills, Michelle Stoliker, Fungo, Christopher Collish, Marissa Martinez, Max Bensimon, Lucas Porter.
You've got me mistaken for someone else. Today's not my...
Also Travis Deng, Simon Anderson, Evan Tekre, Nicholas Stevenson, Ronnie Miners, Ian Melancon.
Is this Leonard?
You mean Erin Leonard? Yes, she too is among the generous crowd. Also Dewey Wayu Hendrayani, Kelvin Bombach, Adele Alfalasi, and Carlos Vega. Happy 24th birthday to you.
But you're wrong. It's not my birthday.